What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. An extremely thin week on the waiver wire, but there's still a few interesting names to go over, including the breakout game from Loveland we've been waiting on. We'll start things off with that because I do think Loveland is probably the pretty clear number one option on free agency for most of you. 6 receptions, 118 yards, 2 touchdowns on 7 targets as part of a 47-42 win for the Bears. He maintained his 81% snap share from last week. And what's interesting about Loveland and why we are excited about him all summer is that the production didn't all just come when he was lined up as a tight end. He had a reception as an outside wide receiver, as a slot wide receiver, as a traditional tight end, and as a running back. At least 1 reception and all those formations. And what that indicates, right, like we don't care in fantasy where he lined up with for the reception. All we care about is reception. But what it indicates is they're willing to move him all around the formation to create mismatches. And whenever we have a very creative and a great head coach, Ben Johnson, of course, was the #1 coach you were looking at in free agency this year, I guess free agency for head coaching cycles, right? He was the guy where we were like, players on his team, just irrespective of how talented they are, when they're going to be put in positions to succeed a lot more often. So when you combine that with them actually being willing to feature Loveland in this way, that is why we were super excited over the summer. That is something that most tight ends can't even dream of happening to them. Like most tight ends, it's like you're a tight end every play. You better go out there and gain separation over the middle of the field because we're never going to put you in mismatches. You're never going to run a route as a running back, as a slot receiver, as a wide receiver. But that's what Loveland is doing. Now, having said that, we need to be a little bit careful. Like, this might have been the breakout game we were looking for. I thought it might happen in like that week 6-7 range. We're not too far removed from that. So the timeline that we were kind of looking at for the breakout was delayed a little bit, but maybe it's happening now. Maybe this is a sign that like he's a locked in tight end 1 rest of the season. But I want to remind everyone, I think we all saw the 58-yard touchdown. It was a pretty fluky play. The Bengals just forgot how to tackle on that play. Up to that point, with 17 seconds left in the game, I guess 17 when he scored, 25 seconds left when the play started, he had 5 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown. Still a very good day. Still playing 80% of the snaps. If we saw that stat line, we'd still be very excited. But we're a little more excited when we see 6 for 118, and a touchdown. Like, there's just a little bit of a difference between those two. So I'm not saying, like, you can't just say it didn't happen, right? Because it's a 58-yard touchdown for a tight end. They were using him on that play. Like, it is a play that we can see happening over time because of how athletic he is, because of how good the offense is, play calling, everything like that. But it was obviously a fluky play. You also had Cole Kmet leaving the game early with a concussion. Of course, when you have that happen mid-game especially, you're going to see extra production flow to Loveland. Personally, I think it should be a sign of things to come, right? They should feature him rest of the season. Clearly, he's an awesome talent. Clearly, he should have a major role on the team. I just don't want people thinking they got to go out there and be like, oh no, I missed on Gadsden. I'm dropping 50% of my fab on Loveland. Would you be doing that? Basically, ask yourself when you put the claim in, would you be putting this claim in if that last play with 20 seconds left had not occurred? And if the answer is still yes, then it's a great claim, right? I'm suggesting 11% of your fab if you need a tight end. If you had 80% of your fab still left and you're like, oh man, I have not been using my fab at all this season and your tight end is pretty garbage, do more. Like, every single week that we advance in, you can kind of put more and more on the guys. Like, we're in week 10, the fantasy playoffs start in week 15. If you're trying to make the playoffs, don't be sitting there with 95% of your fab right now. You got to use these things at some point. So I would suggest 11%. I suggest up to the number 2. But if you had to use number 1, if you wanted to go to 16, 70% of your fab because you need a tight end, sure. But again, I think number 2 claim, 11%, that's probably where it should be valued at right now. Here's the thing about this week, though. Loveland is the only tight end in free agency I looked through everything. And I'll be honest, I looked through all the running backs on free agency. There is truly nothing this week. So a good time to, if you've got a random spot on your bench, grab a handcuff. You never know. With an injury, every running back is unfortunately 1 play away from being done for the season. And so if you've got that last spot, when it comes down to usually a backup tight end, a backup quarterback, especially a 6th or 7th wide receiver that you're never going to use, you can kind of cut those players at this point in favor of a really high upside handcuff. I would say like maybe not so much a handcuff. Probably the top option would be Devin Singletary, but I really don't know how much we want Singletary. I was really surprised to see the split this week, and part of me is like questioning, is there some sort of like underlying injury that happened that we don't know about? Because Tyron Tracy Jr. looked last season, was clearly used ahead of Singletary. Then in camp, he was clearly used ahead of Singletary. Then to open the game, he has 3 touches on the first 5 plays. And so all leading up to that point, every indication we had was that Tracy Jr. is better than Singletary and would have more of a role. But then after those first 5 plays, he had 5 touches for the rest of the game, basically a 50-50 split with Singletary. I think off memory, Singletary had more snaps, but then Tracy had more like passing routes, but basically a 50-50 split. I looked everywhere. I didn't see any indication of even a minor injury that he was playing through. So I suppose we should expect basically a 50-50 split moving forward. To me, it still seems weird. I still don't fully trust that Singletary will have that split, but it doesn't really matter whether it's 50-50, 60-40. If we can expect even 8 touches per game from Singletary, running back is pretty thin after you get past the starters, and he would still be one of those high upside handcuffs because if you had Tracy Jr. going down, well, now they have no one, so now it would be Singletary is probably a featured running back because I don't think they would like trade for anyone. They're not a good enough team to trade for running back, so it's worth spending a couple % of your fab to get someone who's getting some touches every week that you could maybe mix in running back too, but that also has upside if there's injury. But yeah, I really don't understand what happened. Tracy Jr. is a better running back. Every indication leading into the game, every indication starting the game was that he was going to be the guy, and then it just didn't happen. So hopefully we get some reports this week about why that sort of occurred. But yeah, honestly, aside from Singletary, there's nothing that happened in the games through Sunday that's really worth going after. So I would say the high upside handcuffs you're kind of looking at are like Brian Robinson Jr., Tyjae Spears, Bashal Tutin, Blake Corum, Isaiah Davis if there's a trade for Breece Hall. You've got Jaden Blue if there's more injury to Jones Williams, Ollie Gordon if there's an injury to Devon Achane, and then Devin Neal. I mean, that's a pretty low upside one, but in the off chance that they're like, we're not giving touches to Kamara rest season, but that one's pretty thin. That one's probably only in deeper leagues. But yeah, it's really just kind of grabbing some handcuffs. You never really know when the injury is going to happen, but that list is sort of ordered by what I think the upside can be combined with the possibility, right? I put Spears ahead of Tutin. I would prefer Tutin over Spears rest of season if, like, let's say Tony Pollard and Etienne both got injured. They're done for the year. I prefer Tutin for sure. But I think there's a chance that Pollard is traded, whereas Etienne's not getting traded at this point. They already traded Tank Bigsby. So I ordered the list kind of in how I'd like it, but there's a much larger and better ordered list. Not better ordered, it's that exact order. But there's more names that we're looking at on the website. If you guys want to look at that, I'll update that also after this video to make sure everything's good to go there. But yeah, handcuff running backs. At wide receiver, there's a lot of decent options worth spending anywhere from like 2% to 5% of your fab on, depending on league size, how much you need wide receiver. I would say number 1 is definitely Parker Washington. So you've got Travis Hunter on IR. I haven't heard any update about like if we're expecting longer than that, but Travis Hunter on IR. You've got Brian Thomas Jr. I don't know if he's going to miss time, but he left the game with the ankle injury. So you've got Parker Washington. 19 targets over the last 2 games, should play 90% of the snaps over the next month, regardless of Brian Thomas Jr. So one thing is you technically also have Diamond Brown, right? You have Diamond Brown and Parker Washington. If you didn't have Travis Hunter and you didn't have Brian Thomas Jr., those 2 would be full-time wide receivers. But since we don't really know the status of Brian Thomas Jr., Diamond Brown is like a lower end option this week because Parker Washington will play 9% of snaps no matter what happens to Brian Thomas Jr. He'll be a slot wide receiver, outside wide receiver. Like, he'll play a lot of snaps, get a decent amount of targets. Diamond Brown probably won't have that much value if Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't miss time. But yeah, he's going to get targets. Parker Washington, if they don't have Hunter or Brian Thomas Jr., that would be a lot of upside that he would have. He'd have the upside to have 10 to 12 targets in a game. Not a good matchup, though. They're playing the Texans this coming week. So if they don't have Brian Thomas Jr. as well, I mean, it might be really bad for the Jaguars passing offense. But yeah, I still think he's probably the number 1 to go after because he's going to play 90% of the snaps for the next month. Going to have probably like a 7 or 8 target projection over that time, and that's going to help you get through bye weeks. After Washington, I would say you're probably looking at the Colts wide receivers. In most competitive leagues, I would imagine Josh Downs already rostered, but I keep every week looking at the percentages, and Downs still is not clearing 60% roster rate. I assume this week is finally when he pushes past that, but Downs, Alec Pierce probably should be rostered in all formats. Alec Pierce has 28 targets over the last 3 weeks compared to 30 for Michael Pittman Jr. Like 28 targets for Pierce, and those come deep downfield. He has an awesome role right now. The Colts offense had a big step back this last week, but a big step back. They still threw for over 300 yards. Like, this is still an offense that most weeks we are expecting really good production from. If we look since week 5, Pittman is the wide receiver 14 of points per game, Downs wide receiver 21, Pierce wide receiver 30. So it's not like Downs and Pierce are like clear must starts every week. Like most weeks we talk about them being like, yeah, they're fringe options. Like you can put them in the flex spot, second flex spot, third wide receiver, and like you're still probably hoping for a touchdown, but they can have some sort of production if they don't score. They do go on bye in week 11, but I still think like you could play them this next week. You could probably play them in week 12, 13, 14. Like it's a good enough offense where these guys should be rostered in all formats. After the Colts wide receivers, I would say for these guys, 1%, 2%. Don't go crazy on the fab for these guys, but it's Torrey Horton having his breakout game on Sunday night. Christian Watson with the injuries to Green Bay, and then Darius Slayton given a few things that we'll go over in terms of poor officiating and poor play from Darius Slayton, kind of holding back his production. Yeah, Torrey Horton, breakout game on Sunday night. It came because you had Cooper Kupp. Well, really, Cooper Kupp, Bobo, I think Drake Young also out with the injury. Like they just had 3 wide receivers out, so it was expected that you'd have more production from Torrey Horton. The Kupp injury seems short-term. He said that like had he woken up on Sunday and felt good, he could have played in the game. To me, that indicates like he's back next week or the week after. So I don't really know if we can expect to use Torrey Horton outside of pretty deep leagues moving forward. But he looks good. And he was someone we were very excited about in the summer because he looked great in the summer. And when you thought about this team, you're like, okay, we did expect them to be efficient. Maybe not this efficient, right? They've exceeded all expectations as far as like EPA per play and everything like that. But we expected, we know the coaching staff there is good. We expected a decent offense. And you look behind JSN and you're like, you've got Cooper Kupp who can't stay healthy and might not be good anymore, and no one. So you're like, okay, the path to the wide receiver 2 here for Torrey Horton is not that crazy. It's just that he's a rookie wide receiver, and typically it's the second half of the season when rookie wide receivers break out. But that seemed to be the breakout game. He looks fantastic out there. I still think Kupp is probably the number 2. Like if he plays next week, I still think you project Kupp to play more snaps than Torrey Horton and probably for higher target share. But I wouldn't be shocked at all if Kupp came back. If Torrey Horton just looked better and rest of season, he's the one out there in 2 wide receiver sets, and you only have Kupp as a purely 11 personnel wide receiver and with a way lower target share. Like I do think that's a possibility. And because that exists, even if you're in like a 10 or a 12 team league, there's upside here for Torrey Horton because, again, this offense is very, very, very good. They are hyperly efficient. Sam Darnold looks awesome out there. He's exceeded all expectations I had. And because of how good JSN is, he's opening everything else up on offense. So having a clear number 2 on this offense will actually come with a decent amount of upside. So if he can win that role, which he may have done this week, we should be rostering him. So he's number 1 there. Then Christian Watson, it's a similar take as last week, but we talked last week about how it's like, well, they got all these guys, right? Reed will return. You've got Golden probably going to break out. You've got Dobbs there. You've got Kraft. Well, Kraft probably tore his ACL. You have an injury to Golden. We still don't know when Reed's going to come back. So in the short term, all of a sudden, Christian Watson is now out there, probably going to run a ton of routes. He's going to be used deep downfield. He looks pretty good. He looks maybe not 100%, but like close to 100%. I don't know. Like given all of these injuries, we might be talking about Christian Watson as a really strong flex play, someone that, you know, could easily go out there and have 2 for 20, but who has the upside to have 4 or 5 receptions for over 100 and a touchdown. The offense itself will take a big hit losing Tucker Kraft. He's a very important part of this offense. And I still don't know Matthew Golden, like I don't even know if he's going to miss time, like with the shoulder injury. It doesn't seem like it's horrible, but we really have no idea. But if you're going to increase the snaps and the target share for Christian Watson, he should be rostered in all leagues, and then you kind of figure out what you do from there in terms of starting him. I will say also, some people look at Luke Musgrave as if you had Tucker Kraft or if you had someone who hasn't really been working out, I wouldn't go after Musgrave. He's kind of been a bust since joining the NFL. He's never really earned a high-end target share. I don't think you just throw him out there. Like, even Tucker Kraft at times didn't have a ton of targets. It was that they were scheming usage to him because he's super good, super athletic and stuff, right? That's not really Musgrave. So I don't think Musgrave's going to command targets. I don't think they're going to scheme as much usage to him. So it would be something in like a 16-team league if you wanted to add him because it's full PPR and maybe we can project like 3 for 30 or something like that. But for most of you, I really wouldn't look at Musgrave. There are much better options on free agency for tight end. Then for Slayton, I probably sound like a broken record, but he should have had another long touchdown this last week. His stat line would have looked a lot more appealing had that occurred. So last week when I was saying that, it was, I can't remember, maybe like a 50 or 60-yard touchdown. It was a really long touchdown. That was called back due to an incorrectly called offensive pass interference on him. So he actually caught the ball last week, would have had a really good stat line. Would have had, I think it was maybe like 3 for 75 and a score, something like that, which would have been solid, right? And if you had that stat line combined with this week's stat line, had he caught the touchdown that he dropped, we'd have been like, okay, 3 for 75 and a score, 6 for 100 and a touchdown. We'd have been like, all right, like this is someone we should be spending a lot of fab on. But because of the OPI call mixed with the drop, I mean, he should have caught the touchdown this last week. It was like a 35-yard touchdown, easy catch, drops it. No one wants him. He'll be free, probably. Like, I bet you waiver's clear. He's free to add. People would have been lining up to spend 5 to 7% of fab on him had those 2 touchdowns occurred. Now you get him for free. So this is life with him, right? Like, Darius Slayton's not that good of a wide receiver. He will drop touchdown passes like that. And whenever you also have a downfield weapon, there's going to be a lot of variance in play. But Jackson Dart is a very good quarterback. We should expect Slayton to be a full-time receiver on this team. We should expect a decent amount of deep looks. He doesn't go on bye until week 14. So if you've got some buys coming up, he's a good play. Especially, I looked week 12. So week 12, the Broncos are on bye, the Chargers, the Dolphins, and the Commanders. That's a decent amount of like solid wide receivers you might have. They're at the Lions. So that's a game where I would expect them to be trailing. I would expect a couple deep looks for Slayton in a dome. So he might be someone that, like, if you look and you're like, oh my goodness, I have multiple people on bye in week 12. I don't know. Maybe roster him, see if the play continues, see if he finally hits deep downfield, and maybe he is someone we trust by that point. But again, don't go after him crazy because no one's going to. Like, you can probably add him for free. Quarterback streaming. Decent amount of options this week. Unfortunately, of another injury for Jaden Daniels, so Mariota is probably the top option. At this point, like, I haven't actually seen the severity of the injury, how long it's going to be. But at this point, like, if you have Jaden Daniels, you should have been just rostering Mariota and just understanding that you're just going to play the starter every week. But this week versus the Lions, I mean, it's going to be a good start for Mariota. Like, obviously, he's less mobile than Jaden Daniels. Obviously, he's a much worse quarterback overall. But Mariota is one of the better backups in the league. He is also mobile, so they can continue the exact same offense, and they should be trailing against the Lions. So he's going to be a good option. McCarthy versus the Ravens, that's going to be a great spot. Sam Darnold versus the Cardinals, Brock Purdy versus the Rams, and then Justin Fields versus the Browns. I'll have the updated projections tomorrow. Of course, I have the first run on Tuesday, but I feel pretty good about that general order, kind of mixing also short and long-term upside into that. Like I said, Mariota not as good as Jaden Daniels, but if you have a mobile quarterback playing, against the Lions in a trailing game script, you're going to have upside in fantasy. You would like Terry McLaurin to return from injury, but you wouldn't need it to happen to play him. And then McCarthy did not look that good against the Lions, but the fact that he's so willing to take off near the goal line, the fact that he's got such great coaching, elite playmakers, it means that he can hit on high-end fantasy outcomes on very limited completions. He had 22.2 fantasy points in week 1 on 13 completions, another 19 fantasy points this last week on only 14 completions. So would you love for him to be more accurate? Absolutely. Would you love for more than 13, 14 completions in games? Absolutely. But the fact that he can hit on 19 or more fantasy points on very limited completion shows you how good the skill players are, how nice the fantasy upside is for rushing, and how good the game environments are for this offense. It's a very good offense. He doesn't need to be that amazing to put up good fantasy numbers, and he's got a great rest of season strength of schedule. He's probably going to be like a top 14 quarterback most weeks. And this week, home versus the Ravens, that's a spot where the Ravens going to put up points. That their defense has been struggling this season. It's in a dome. It's going to be another good spot for McCarthy. We'll see again exactly where he ranks, but he'll be a good option this week. You got to just hope he stays healthy. We can also look at the former Viking again, Sam Darnold. Unbelievable. I mentioned this earlier, he's exceeded all expectations this season. We knew that the coaching staff was good and that they were going to be a good offense. I did not think they would be this good. 330 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 21 of 24 passing. Didn't you have 16 or 17 pass attempts in a row that were completed? He looked fantastic. He's progressing through the progressions beautifully. And again, it's JSN. It's a rookie. It was no Cooper Kupp, no Jake Bobo. He's got a rookie tight end that he's using now. This is not even nearly as good of a skill group than he had last year in Minnesota, but he's playing so well right now. The scheme is awesome. He's playing awesome. So he'll be good moving forward. Cardinals this week, it's not a slam dunk matchup, but it's certainly not one we're avoiding. He always has that floor because this is also an offense that can be really good rushing the ball near the end zone. We didn't see it this last week, but they could score 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns. So you always have that to play with, but he's just been playing so well that I feel like he should be rostered everywhere. And then Purdy and Fields feel like the 2 risky plays, right? I'll say with Purdy, if Pierce can get healthy, he can get healthy. Ayuk can come back. If all of these things can occur, then Purdy's going to be really, really good in fantasy. But you'll have the setback risk with Purdy. I have no idea if Pearsall's even going to play this season at this point. I have no idea if Ayuk's ever going to come back. There's so much unknown to the injury that it's still a risky ad. But once we get health for San Fran, my goodness, that offense is going to be awesome. And then Fields. Fields could score anywhere from 2 to 38 points this coming week. He's got a tough matchup against the Browns, but he's hypermobile. He could run for 100 yards and a score. He could have, didn't he have over 35 fantasy points with no Garrett Wilson the week before? It was just, he's a very good quarterback. It probably wasn't 35. It was probably closer to the upper 20s. But he can have these sort of performances if he can hit on the rushing. But he could also score 2 fantasy points and be benched. So understand that the variance there is crazy. But if you're a big time underdog this coming week and you see Justin Fields on free agency, he is someone that can really blow past his projection, and maybe that's what you want. Then finally, defense streaming. There are once again really strong options. This is a fantastic year for streaming. I think because in a lot of years, there's less really bad teams and also more defenses that we can just stream every week. There's only a couple defenses you'd be okay streaming regardless of matchup. And really one, it's the Texans. That's probably it. And then there's 5 or 6 teams that are just so bad that you just want to stream any defense against them. Again, I'll have the projections up, but I think right now how I'd order them are the Texans versus the Jaguars, the Seahawks versus the Cardinals, Panthers versus the Saints, Bucks versus Patriots, Colts versus the Falcons, Bears versus the Giants, Jets versus the Browns, Bills versus the Dolphins, and then Browns at the Jets this coming week. Again, I added the rest of season defense streaming page on the website. I also tweeted out last week. But what I would do personally, if the Texans are still available, which you should have added them last week, but if the Texans are still available, and if the Bucks are still available, that is the single best combination you can have right now. Not only are the Texans the top 3 defense, but they have a great playoff schedule. They're home versus the Cardinals, home versus the Raiders, and then at the Chargers, whose offensive line is falling apart again. So it's also worth noting weeks 10, 11, they have good matchups as well. You combine that with the Bucks, who have a great week 13 and 14 schedule. So if you roster the Texans and the Bucks, you have an amazing start every single week rest of season besides week 12. Week 12, they both have bad matchups, but if that's the case, right, you could roster these 2 defenses and every single week through the fantasy championship, you have an amazing start. I just think you kind of have to do that if possible. Again, it might not be possible to get both of them, but if you can only get one, it's definitely the Texans. They have a great rest of season schedule. It's weeks 10 and 11 are really good for them. Then they have a lull 13, 14 or 12, 13, 14, but then right back in the fantasy playoffs. It's amazing. So really, I would be going after them if possible, but if possible, both of them would be great. Again, Texans and Bucks, or just go by the list I have on the screen. All right, that'll do it for the waiver wire this week. Good luck to everyone who needs a miracle on Monday night. I need 12.5 half PPR points from Marvin Harrison Jr. tonight to win a much-needed matchup. So apologies if you have him. Let's be honest, he's not going to go off if I need him to have a great game. So rest season rankings will be updated later this afternoon. Week 10 rankings will be live tomorrow. Trade video on Wednesday. Rankings video on Thursday. Underdog video on Friday. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of that. That'll do it for this one, though. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all on the next one.